or because you think he's sincere, or, more to the point, you vote for A because you hate B. That's how most people vote. They don't like A at all, but they really hate B. So they vote for A, the lesser of two evils. That's not how to solve this problem. And we cannot base an organization on anything less than principles. Our people must understand the principles of a free society. We must know what we are for as well as what we are against. Now, before looking at solutions, we need to ask why no one has found a solution before. We've been at this game for quite a while. I've been aware of these problems since the early 1960s. And some people have been watching it and fighting it for much longer than that. Some very smart people, some very wealthy people, well-educated people, well-connected people, organizations, a lot of motion in that direction. And no one has solved this problem before. Why have we been losing our freedom in spite of that? I think the answer was given to us in the year 500 BC by a rather famous philosopher, Chinese philosopher and warrior by the name of Sun Tzu. He wrote this little booklet called The Art of Warfare. And that, by the way, is used, I believe, in every war college in the world. They study the philosophies and the strategies of Sun Tzu. And one of the things that Sun Tzu said is this. He said, if a man knows himself and his opponent, he need not fear 100 battles. If he knows himself but not his opponent, then for every victory he will suffer a defeat. And if he knows neither himself nor his opponent, then he will suffer defeat in every battle. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have been suffering defeat in virtually every battle. And I think that suggests that we do not know ourselves, and we certainly do not know our opponent. So let's take a few moments and ask what we know about our opponent and then what we know about ourselves, and then we'll finally get to the strategy. There are four things we know about our opponent that are crucial facts. One is that modern totalitarian systems are all variants of collectivism. Well, that's not quite true. In the Western world, they are. In the Middle East, of course, they're based on theocracies. There's still theocracy out there. We find it hard to believe, but it involves a major portion of the world. But in the United States and in the Western countries of the world, the totalitarian systems are not theocracies. They are based on the ideology of collectivism. Now, we must understand, although that's not our topic here today, that's one of those previous parts that we have to skip over. We must understand that communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism, all of those isms that we've been taught are so bad are mere variants of a common denominator ideology called collectivism. That's what they all are. Their differences are minuscule. Their commonalities are great. They're all based on the principle of big government, that the end justifies the means, that the group is more important than the individual, and so forth. So all of these systems out there are basically collectivism. And even today now, we're watching our own country being moved closer and closer into a totalitarian system because we have adopted collectivism in our political system. And we don't call it Nazism or communism or fascism, but in a very real degree there's no longer much difference between the system we live under and the systems we have been taught to reject. The second thing we need to know about our opponent is that there are two main branches of them. I mentioned that to you earlier. We have the Leninists on the one side, who we used to think of the old-time communists, you know. Well, they merely took off their hat that said communism and they put a new hat on that said Democrat, Socialist, or something like that, you know. They have a different name, but they're the same heads under the hats, did you know? The heads didn't change. Basically, the philosophies had not changed. So we have this whole big section of the world who may call themselves social democrats or something like that, but they are still Leninists. And if you read their works very carefully, you may find a Gorbachev or somebody like that saying, oh yes, Stalin was bad, so good that we got rid of Stalinism, whatever that is. But he would say, don't forget, we'll never abandon the principles of Leninism. And to the average person, that doesn't mean anything. They don't. What is Leninism? I'll talk about that in just a moment. We have these two branches. The other branch, of course, I have in the past called the Fabians, because of the Fabian Society. Perhaps a better name would be to call them the Rhodesians, because they're the followers and the disciples of Cecil Rhodes. Anyway, it's that other camp, the ones that choose not to have a name, so that we have to struggle to find a name to describe them. That's the brilliance of their strategy. We are in the grips of a worldwide struggle between two camps of collectivism, and we are being asked to choose up sides. That's part of the trick. We're not going to find freedom in either side. And the sooner we wake up to that fact, the better off we'll be. The third thing we must understand is that collectivists are not content with persuasion. Their method is coercion. If something is worth doing, it's worth forcing people to do. That's one of the tenets of collectivism. Not freedom of choice, but we will force people to do what they should do. That's the philosophy. If we're going to talk about protecting people in time of crash, automobile crash, we can say, well, they ought to have seatbelts. Collectivist says, yes, seatbelts, good idea. Let's pass a law and force everyone to have seatbelts on. Or if not, we'll put them in prison. An individualist, which is the other camp, would say, well, I think seatbelts are a good idea too, but I don't think it's coercing everybody to wear a seatbelt. Let's educate them, let's convince them, let's show them by good example or whatever, but we're not going to put people in jail for not wearing seatbelts. And that's the division, you see. The collectivist believes in coercion, and the ultimate weapon of coercion is the law. And that is why collectivists always gravitate into government, because government is the instrument by which they can bring about their schemes and plans of how to improve society, because they're going to force people to do it through government. That is why almost always you find governments populated by collectivists, because the people, such as ourselves perhaps, who don't believe in coercion, we don't want to go to government. We want to be out in the private sector. So we get this lopsided situation where all of the people with power are collectivists. And we have to do something to change that. Back in the 60s, I became interested in all of these collectivist totalitarian systems, and I bought a copy of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf and read it, and gee, that's pretty scary. But I saw how he was using collectivism to manipulate the masses for a fascist system. And then I started to read the works of the communists, you know, Lenin and Stalin and the others. And for a while, I would go down to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles, down in Larchmont Street. It was called the People's Bookshop. And I was hanging out with the comrades down there. They didn't really know why I was there. They thought I was potentially a recruit, you know. And they invited me to some of their discussion groups. And I went. I wanted to learn. And I found out what they talk about and how they think. And I bought their books and I read them. And I got it. And one of the things that I got during that period of my enlightenment was the difference between a Marxist and what they call a Marxist-Leninist. Now, that may sound like nothing, you know, words, what's Marxist-Leninist business? Well, pretty important distinction. A Marxist is a person who's read the writings of Karl Marx, you know, Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto, and he believes that in his heart. He knows it's true. Workers of the world, unite. Throw off your chains.